Our topic for today is storytelling on wildlife photography. And our guest for today is Matthew Yardley, who's going to be taking us through very lovely photography and experiences. And I'm so happy for what we're going to be looking at tonight. And I hope all of you enjoy it. And I'll pass you on now to Graeme Leslie, who's going to give us a bit of a background about our guest speaker for today. Enjoy.
Lovely. Lovely, Ayanda. Thank you so much. And again, welcome to Simbitia, Ayanda, and welcome to the environmental webinar. As Ayanda said, this is the first one, a virtual one, and we'll see how it goes and see perhaps we'll have it more like this. So to introduce our speaker, Matt said he'll be saying a bit more about himself, so I'll just give you a quick rundown of what he is. He is a safari guide, a conservationist, and he's done a lot of traveling in Africa. He's worked with major tour companies. He takes guided tours, or has run guided tours, from looking at big game to turtles. And while guiding, he's done a lot of guiding, but apparently photography is his passion. And he's going to develop that in his talk. For the last 8 years, he's been leading photographic tours on the continent and focusing on, as he says, on the fine art which pushes the boundaries on norms of photography. So no pressure there, Matt, but well done. So we look forward to your presentation. Over to you, Matt.
Great, Graeme, Ayanda, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for having me. I'm just going to quickly share my screen just so we can get things started. And so welcome to what I hear is the first online webinar, which is very, very exciting. And as Ayanda and Graeme have mentioned, today's topic is going to be about photography, but photography in a sense is so broad, and it's so, there's so much about it. So I'm going to keep it a bit brief. Hence storytelling and wildlife photography. So before I carry on, before I get into it, I just want to quickly introduce myself a bit further. And my name is Matt Yardley, as you've heard. I grew up on a farm in a small farming town called Ishawi, which is a little inland, for those who might know. And from a very, very, very young age, I was completely immersed not only into the bush, but into the Zulu culture as well, as you can see on the left. And on the right, managed to save a monkey who I aptly named Monkey. So from day dot, I was involved in the bush and culture. And this passion grew and grew. And ultimately, it got me into guiding. And I have guided many, many areas throughout Africa, mostly in South Africa, from big game walking. And as you can see on the top left and bottom right, the turtle guiding. So the bottom right is what we call a leatherback turtle. She was just short of a ton. So it really has taken me to far and wide regions, exploring some crazy places with some crazy animals. And of course, my favorite part, the crazy people that come along with it. And on the left was myself with a young Maasai warrior on the edge of the Ngorongoro crater rim. And in the middle photograph and the right photograph was probably one of the most special trips that I've ever done in Zambia, where we really went into the absolute middle of nowhere. And there was this leprosy colony. So yeah, can you even imagine that leprosy still exists in our world today? And these young kids were just so inspiring. And so, this is where photography has taken me and my guiding has taken me. And one of the most sort of penultimate, one of my greatest sort of achievements was being expedition leader on one of the National Geographic photographic expeditions that we hosted in East Africa to go and watch the migration. So, like I say, far and wide, lots of crazy animals and crazy people, which has been fantastic. So again, let's go back to this photography thing. So when we talk photography, where do we start? And what I think we start at the most important part, which is the storytelling. Every photograph is worth 1,000 words. We know that cliche. So for me, storytelling in wildlife photography is where you start. But how do we do so? Like, how do we tell a story? And I'm going to go through a few different things today, a few different hints and tips and ideas. A lot of the photographs you see here are mine, except for Rambo. I'll introduce you to Rambo in a second. So he's not my photograph, but all the other photography that you see in this presentation is my photography. I'm going to focus heavy on fine art photography because I find it very inspiring. It's not your normal photograph. It's something different. It's a completely different idea around what a photograph might look like. So that's where I'm going to start. Before we get there, and we were chatting about it earlier, the contentious issue of equipment. Okay, so what equipment do you get? And my answer to people is Gitmo. So what on earth does Gitmo mean? Okay, that's ridiculous. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Craig Groeschel, but he's a wonderful public speaker, and he introduced me to this idea of Gitmo, and this is pretty much what it is. Okay, it's got enough to move on. So on the left, you've got the quality of your camera and your equipment versus your investment on the bottom. You know, you're going to get to a point where you're going to be spending a lot more money on your cameras, and you still haven't got the basics of photography right. So, you know, there's people ask me which cameras to buy, etc. So what I carry in my bag is a 7D Mark II, a Canon 7D Mark II, and a 100-400mm Mark II lens. I've then got what you call a nifty 50 and a 24-70 that I can rotate onto my Canon 70D body. So I've got a cheap body, entry-level body, 100-400, 24-70, and a nifty 50. That's all I've got. There's nothing else, and I keep it very simple. And the reason why I've done that is because I can't afford more. But I know that with that equipment, I can really, really, really improve my photography. It's something that we can talk about forever. We can go on for hours on which is the right equipment, what's the right combination. I am a Canon user. I started with Nikon, and both are just as good as each other. And luckily in this webinar, I can't hear people shouting out, no, they're not. So that's fantastic. So when it comes to equipment, later on, I'm going to leave my details. We can discuss this further because you really, really can get, it's a rabbit hole that you can really fall down. You know, but people say, yeah, but if I don't get the right equipment, how would I take good photographs? Well, here's a few ideas, okay? And the next few photographs were the very first photographs I ever took, among the first anyway. And I learned very quickly to get creative. And that's where it sort of started to introduce me into fine art photography. So things like panoramics, high key shooting, and moody shots. These you can do with any level of camera. You don't have to have the expensive cameras. So here, the Cheetah, as you can see, you underexpose the shot to bring the clouds out on a cheap camera. These types of things you can get away with, and you can certainly do. You don't have to have expensive. If you're going to buy, if let's say, for example, you've got a 10,000 Rand budget for camera equipment, don't spend all 10,000 on your camera. Remember, what's important is post-production and lessons. Perhaps the guiding. What about guiding? You know, getting into the right game reserves where they're going to put you in front of the right sightings. Those types of things need to be factored in when buying your equipment. That counts a lot more than getting the top of the range. I've had countless amounts of guests who unwrap these 250,000 Rand, you know, setups, and they shoot on what I call the big green A, automatic. And you know, to me, that's a disaster. They would be far better off, and they'd have a lot more fun using my camera in their photography and getting creative. So have a look at here. Okay, so in terms of panos, this is a shot that I took. This is what we call a pano. And because I took lessons and because I invested in my post-production, like Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom, this is what the power of Lightroom can do. And it only costs 100 or 200 Rand a month. It costs for Photoshop and Lightroom. That's it. So well worth the investment. All I had was a 7300 lens on my Nikon and a very, very, I think it was a Nikon 1200 if I forget the D1200 if I remember correctly. But I was adamant to get this shot because it's a cheetah and the plains with the sunset. So surely you've got to capture this. So what I did was I took a picture on the far left where the cheetah is. I took another one in the middle, then I took a third, and then I took a fourth of the sun. And in post-production, I combined them all together. I only had one body and one lens. That's it. And I overexposed on the cheetah because, of course, it was getting dark in the sun. So this is the power that you can achieve this from a very cheap camera and just investing in your software. So just something to remember. Here's a very high key shot. The conditions were terrible, but this was an elephant calf eating a beautiful, what we call Natal red top. And you know, I just didn't want to lose the shot. So what I did was I took my camera and I completely blew it out. I completely overexposed, for those who know photography. And you bring out all the shadows and you get the story of this beautiful little elephant feeding on the grass. And then, of course, this lion, there was some light falling down through the trees onto his face. And I really wanted to capture that. So again, what I did here was I slightly underexposed and left the light to do the rest of the work. So these are little things. I could go into depth about them, but just perhaps think of them as ideas around equipment. Okay, don't stress too much about having the best of the best, because I promise you within a year, there'll be something better. I'm forcing myself not to buy the new Canon R5 mirrorless because I don't want to turn into, here's Rambo, I thought I'd introduce him now. So, you know, all the gear, no idea. So please don't become a Rambo out there. There's too many of them already. You will know when your photography skills have superseded your equipment. You will know, and by then you'll have a much better idea what to buy. And that's, you know, so don't go out and just buy something blind. Start simple, what you can afford, get the basics right. That's where you need to start with your equipment. If you're a bit more of an advanced photographer and you want to know a bit more, like I say, we'll definitely chat after this. I can definitely go into some ideas for you. Something that's very important. So if you've got cheap equipment, here's something that I shot of a poor sort of setup I thought at the time. This is the first photograph that led me into fine art, I would say, because this was a complete mistake. There was an elephant swimming and I just could not get the photograph right. And when I thought I had, I went back into my room to go and edit it. And it was just a disaster. It was too busy. Nothing was working. There was nothing, and it just didn't come out right. In complete frustration, what I did was I took filters in Lightroom and I threw them all over the page, literally in frustration. And I saw something. I saw a big black area and I thought, well, maybe. And so on I went and I paid a bit for a bit of Lightroom lessons. And this is what I ended up with. And it just completely changed my world of photography. And I think that's important, to learn your style and to find what your style is and then invest in that. So moving off equipment and potential ways of getting around it, let's dive back into the sort of storytelling and around a photograph and the storytelling in photography. And, you know, when you Google, how do you tell a good story? One of the first things that you'll see is the hook. Okay. So the hook is something that will really grab the viewer's attention or the listener's attention. And in photography, how do we do that? How do we use techniques that will grab the viewer's attention? And one of the ways is, as an example, is the rule of thirds. A lot of us might know this. It's basically what the rule of thirds is you take your potential photograph, and even in some cameras, you'll see a grid, 3 lines across and 3 lines down. And you place your subject in the photograph, and you can place them on the left third, on the right third, the bottom third. There's no actual rule. It's more of a guideline to try and, like I say, create a story. So to give you an example, this leopard was, we were out in the Serengeti on a National Geographic trip that we were doing. And we could see that the gazelle were going crazy. They were alarm calling and looking in one direction, but we just could not see what they were looking at. And we were completely baffled. And we sort of drove around a bit and looked. And then I remember distinctly scanning my eyes across the grass, and there was a leopard looking straight at me, crouched down exactly like he is now. Then once he sort of realized he was spotted, he sat up. But I felt like getting that photograph again. That moment when I locked eyes with him crouched down like that, I almost felt like the prey. So that's the photograph I wanted. I didn't want to photograph this leopard sitting up in the grass. Well, I did, but the shot that I was really after was him crouching down. That same feeling I got when he locked eyes with me, well, with the vehicle, I wanted that again. So by using rule of thirds, what I did with this leopard, I moved him slightly off center. Do you see how he's sitting off to my right? And the reason I did that is so that your eyes have to look through the picture to find his eyes. And then when they do, they lock on, and it gives you the sense of looking for this leopard who's very well hidden. Okay, so rule of thirds can be used in many, many, many different ways. This is just one example, and it just adds that little extra to the story. If I'd taken a picture of this leopard dead on, straight on, in the middle of his face, in the middle of the picture, it would have been a great picture, I'm sure. But because now your eyes have to drift across the picture to look for him, it makes you work, and when you look, it makes you feel like the prey again. So that's one of the ways that rule of thirds can become so like impactful, which sort of leads me on to the next one, which, as you can see in this photograph, which I'll come back to in a second, the next is the eyes. So this photograph took me months and months and months to capture. And the reason being is I just could not find a line that wanted to look up. And I had this image in my mind, like going out to shoot, to know what you want is so important. And I wanted a lion looking up into the sun, and it just never seemed to happen. And so what happened was one day we're out in game drive, and I was actually on my way to go and fetch guests. I had another set of guests with me, and we are going to go fetch their friends from the airstrip. And on our way to the airstrip, we came across this pride of lions. In the distance, I could hear my guest plane arriving. And as the plane came down to land, which was quite low by then, this young cub, this young male just couldn't help himself, and he had to look up at what this thing was flying overhead. And there was my moment, and I was ready, and I captured him. So thanks to my guest flying over. So it's a bit of a bizarre one, a bit of a bizarre backstory, but I got my shot nonetheless. And I noticed immediately the eyes that were casting upward. And I was just so fortunate that I used a very low aperture in the shot. So the background was completely blown out, which allowed me to really fiddle with it and create a sort of mist-like coming down. I don't want to go too much into the details around the editing because, like I said, I could talk about it forever. But the eyes are so important. I can't stress that enough in photography. Even forget rule of thirds, forget everything else I tell you today, but just remember the eyes. And the reason being is, it's in human nature. When somebody hands you a photograph or somebody hands you a baby, we instinctively look at the eyes. And the cliche again, and I'm sorry for all my cliches, but the eyes are the window to the soul. And if you're going to tell a story in a photograph, there is no better place to start than the eyes. So make sure that they are lit up, you can see them clearly. And there's something about an eye that's very important that I've learned in my photography, especially in post-production. There's 3 parts to an eye that you want to capture. I have no idea what they're called, okay? So please excuse the words that I use, but there's the white part, then there's the darker part in the middle, and then there's the real small black part. So if I go back one picture, look at the leopard's right eye. Can you see how there's the white part? Then there's the little dark part in the middle. But then there's the third thing that's so important, is the catch light. Okay, so if you look in the leopard's eye, can you see that little white spot there? That's what we call catch light. Now, that is something that I strive for in every single photograph that I take, and I try my absolute damnedest not to miss that. It is something about that catch light that brings that eye to life. In post-production, when you make an eye lighter, you call it dodging, and when you bring the eye darker, you call it burning. So I like to dodge the eye, make it brighter so you can catch that white. As you can see in this line, you can see that white section. It just brings life into that eye. I don't know what it is, but it is so vitally important. And you'll see it in the photographs coming up in the profile shots. You'll see that this catch light is so very important. Here's another shot of, you can see the catch light in this lioness's eye. She runs towards, she was actually hunting in Anyala here. And there's something in wildlife photography, often on game drives, the guests want to sit higher. My photography guests want to sit high up on the vehicle because they get a better view, apparently, which is probably true. However, I feel that for photography, lower is better, especially in wildlife photography. I call it the low angle inferiority. It makes you feel that the animal is bigger and stronger than you. And why? Well, because it is. If you're trying to tell a story about this animal and you're trying to make it big and you're trying to make it yourself feel inferior, this is the way to do it. You get below their eye level. One trick of doing that, so in this case, you got to wonder, was I lying on the ground as this lioness ran past me? No. So one of the tricks of the trade to get a low angle, which completely changes your photography, is if you think of it, if this is the vehicle and the lion is sitting here, you're shooting down on the lion. If you move the vehicle back, however, your angle becomes much lower. And so if you've got a bigger lens, of course, so you can do this if you've got a 400mm lens or 600mm, whatever the case might be. So if you've got a termite mount to work with or a ditch, then you absolutely drive into the ditch to get that lower angle. But by just moving back, you can drop that angle and it will completely change the story in your photograph by appearing lower than the actual animal itself. You can also use low angles in this example to sort of feel like you're immersed. So I call it immersion. So you by having a low angle, if there's a lion lying down, or in this case, a lioness is drinking, you can perhaps get the feeling that you're a part of that crew, that you're a part of them, that you're at eye level with them. And in this picture, just something else, one of the hooks that you can use as well. For some reason, humans love odd numbers. Some inside of us, that if we look at a picture, we'll feel more comfortable looking at a picture if there's one subject, 3 subjects, or 5 subjects. So, don't go and waste a good photograph because you're counting animals, but just something to remember. So in this case, nicely neat 3 rule of thirds, all each lioness in each third almost, and all the eyes lined up in the middle third with the catch light in almost every single lioness's eye. You've got the low angle to make you feel like you're immersed into this photograph as well. So in this photograph, there's quite a few examples of hooks that you could potentially use, and you can see how it just sucks you into this photograph, completely draws you in. And the only time that I would suggest that you don't worry about the odd numbers is if there's an interaction. And interactions, as we know, I mean, telling a story, if there's an interaction between two animals, there's no better way to tell a story than that, is there? So I wouldn't stress about that too much, but just these are all sort of things just to remember. None of these are rules. What I suggest is you learn the basics, take these on as rules, and then completely break them. You know, and like an elephant that was swimming for me, you know, make a mistake, because that's where you learn, and that's where you're going to really find out what works for you and what your style is. When it comes to telling a story, there's something that I have to remind myself, and I have to remind my guests of every time we go out. So, you know, to tell a story, often it helps if we use what's happened to us in the past. So, for example, I say you. Okay, so what have you experienced? What have you gone through in life? What can you bring to this photograph that other people can see? And, you know, it all rotates around the subject, what it's doing. So you take you and your experience. The yours in this diagram represents the camera. So how can you use your camera? High key, low angles, those panels, all those sorts of things, to stir their emotion. And then it comes back to you again. So this wheel of your emotions, using your camera to stir their emotions around the subject, is something you have to constantly think of. I know it sounds a little bit out there, but it brings a whole new element to your photograph, because no longer, so often my guests are concentrating on getting a sharp image of the cheetah in good light. But let's be honest, in wildlife and on game drive, how often is that the case? So these are types of things I think you need to bring to the photography that makes you think differently, but at the same time makes you portray your emotions. And, you know, so for example, I've put this lion in here. So, I mean, many people can read this in many ways, but the way that I wanted to portray this this is in fact a lion who's finishing a yawn. So he was yawning, and I had a very high shutter speed, a very rapid drive mode. So it was continuous shooting and a lot of frames per second. And then I caught him on his way down. But when I was looking at the photograph, and when I was at the sighting, I felt that this lion was in anguish. You know, every time I saw him yawn, because he yawned a few times, I felt that sort of anguish feeling. And then by shooting and him closing his mouth to that point, I captured that moment that I was happy with. I'm like, yes, okay, I've got my camera on a very high frame rate, and it's caught this moment, done. So how do I stir their emotion? Well, I want this particular frame because I want other people who are looking at it to feel sort of an anguish. Some people have told me that they feel like he's almost laughing, which is fine. I mean, if I stir a happy emotion in someone, then that's also okay. But you see how it changes this photograph? It's no longer just a lion yawning. It's now you taking the photograph in a way that's telling a story, and it makes such a huge, huge difference. I'll give you an example. So in my career, there was a time where my photography was starting to sort of take off a bit, and I was taking a few more photographic vehicles, but this also meant a career choice. Where do I go? What is my next step? So for me, it was a really tough time, because there was a lot that I had to let go of in order to advance in my career. So I was so anxious, and I really felt like I needed some support, you know, somebody who could sort of tell me it's okay. And I thought, you know what, let me use this. Let me listen to my own advice, and let me take this feeling into the bush. And who better to photograph than elephants? Okay. So my knowledge of elephants, and using my style of fine art and perhaps some settings on my camera, I thought, I like elephants because they're so emotionally intelligent, and they're going to probably best portray the emotion that I'm feeling out of all the animals in the bush. So I wanted people to look at a picture and feel sort of empathy and support or consoling of one another. And I had an idea. I know that when elephants, young bulls, when they push each other around, it's a very special bond for them, but also a way of, you know, establishing dominancy from a young age. And so that's what I wanted to do. That afternoon, I said to the guests, we're heading out to a watering hole where I feel these elephants are going to arrive to drink for the afternoon. And as though it was scripted, the elephants arrived. And on top of that, there were two young bulls who had sort of left the drinking and swimming for a bit while they were pushing each other around. And here's the photograph that I got from across the waterhole, which is a great photograph. It's exactly what I wanted. It's 100% emotion. The elephant on my left, or the left of the screen, is almost, you can see his head dip down a little lower. Its eyes looking forward toward the bull. Now, if you taking a lot of photographs frame per second, you can capture these. So that's something important to remember. To take bursts of 3, bursts of 5, depending on what your camera can do. Because the eye at that moment looked across as though it was down. And I might be accused of anthropomorphism, putting human qualities into a picture, but I feel like we're trying to tell a story from these animals. So I think this time it's excusable. And the elephant on the right of the screen, you can see it looks a lot more calm to me, and its eyes looking down, and it just looks as though it's consoling this other elephant. So it just, as like I say, as though it was scripted, I got my picture that I wanted, and I was so chuffed. But I felt like there was more to this. I felt like I could have done a lot more. I can really drag this emotion out. So I went back to my good old style of fine art photography, high contrast, high, moody shots. And I decided, let me really try and draw all the emotion out of this. So I'm going to push, okay, when I change to the next slide, it's going to do a slow transition into my final edit. So I'm going to push the button now. Have a look at this transition. So there we go. So I felt like by simplifying the outside of the elephants and completely drilling into where these eyes were meeting and this consoling, I felt like that is the moment. That is where, that's the shot that I planned on. That's the shot that I got. And it's exactly the emotion that I wanted. This photograph led me to making my decision that I was battling with. And that was to become a photographic guide. In fact, this photograph went on to become my bestseller. By far, it completely outsold any other photograph that I've ever sold. And not only that, but I put this photograph up to different charities for auction, and it raised over 25,000 Rand for different charities through rhinos and elephants and all sorts of other charities. So this became a very, very, very successful picture for me. And, when I look at it now, even now looking at it, it just reminds me of, this all started from a random emotion that I felt at the lodge, from that little anxious feeling that I had. And this is the power of taking your feelings into a photograph and what it can do for you. The next point is the most difficult one. The one that none of us seem to get right, including myself, and I'll happily admit that. The ready, wait, go. So, Whitney Young is a young activist, a young American activist, and he puts it best. He says, it is better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one, than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. All right, so he couldn't have put it any better, because we all know wildlife photography, be patient, be patient, be patient. And I struggle with it myself. So the thing is, are you ready, to wait? So if I just go back one slide, are you ready to wait? And are you going to wait long enough and patiently enough? And are you ready to go? So in other words, it's one thing waiting, but you could get so distracted that you forget to change settings. You might not notice something. So it's a real sort of task. It's a real thing to sort of get your mind ready to sit at that sighting and wait. And I call it the famous 5. My friends give me a hard time for how corny I can be. And, we just ignore them. But I call it the famous 5. So when you're at a sighting, just try it out. Just wait another 5 minutes. Just hang on, because it is unbelievable how many times something just randomly happens. And that photograph that you've been waiting for finally is there. And then just be sure to be ready. On this photograph, it's quite funny, because I think I might be the only photographer perhaps in the world and in all time to get motion blur on a tortoise. So I don't know, for the photographers out there, the motion blur is when your shutter speed is a bit too slow and you get like a leg moving or a head moving. It can be effective. It can be very effective, as you might see in the next picture. However, on the tortoise, I feel a bit ashamed anyway. So I thought it'd be quite fun to put a tortoise who's moving really quickly. So here's an example of first motion blur. You can see the claw coming down in this poor male and how effective it can be, because it does give you a sense that this claw is moving very quickly. But this is a sighting that we were at in Pinda, which is Pinda Private Game Reserve, is a reserve I used to guide in for quite some time. And up in the northern grasslands, there were 2 male cheetah who we wanted to go out and look for. And we're driving along, and the tracker spotted this male in the grasslands, a very good spot. So off we go, and we drive across to this male, and I could see the other cheetah on the left. It was lying in the grass, but just couldn't work out. Something just felt a bit amiss. Something was a bit off. And we quickly realized, I saw this cheetah, ears started flattening, the tail started flicking toward this male. So I quickly shouted to my guests, get ready, get ready, get ready. And no sooner were we ready, you can probably see him. I mean, my settings probably weren't the best here, but still, managed to get the shot off. And what happened was that these 2 males had come across a female with 3 cubs. Now, the cheetah launching is the female, and the other male is now chasing the 3 cubs off somewhere in the grassland, which we couldn't see. So this poor male, I think he just sort of conceded to the fact that he's just going to get absolutely pummeled here. You can tell in his face that he's just, oh, well, I'll just take it. So I thought it was quite an amusing shot. But, by looking at this animal behavior, which I'm going to definitely touch on in a bit, animal behavior, you're ready. Because it's not only about waiting to be ready, you've also got to be ready at any given time. So how about this for an idea for someone who's not really into their photography, or was just, sorry, for somebody who's getting into photography, rather, I should say, somebody who's new at it. How about putting your camera on automatic and leaving it there, because you might just have to pick it up and shoot. I know it sounds ridiculous, but as you get more confident, there are ways that you can set your camera up. Like what I've done is there's certain buttons you can program to have a single focus or multi-focus or AR focus and AF continuous and Nikon, they call it. So you can set it up later. But how about, as an idea, putting your camera on automatic? Don't be scared to do that, because if you need to pick up and shoot, if you need to shoot from the hip, John Wayne style, this is the sort of thing that you might be picking up on. So until you get to know the camera a bit better, then you're not forgiven to be on the big green A. But until then, also waiting could also mean, or being ready could also mean early hours, and it could mean very cold and very bored. So this was up in the Serengeti again on the National Geographic expedition that we were on, that photographic tour. And the night before, on our way home, we came across this big open hill with this, and we saw this as a potential sunrise spot. Now, our intention here was to actually just take photographs of the vehicles of the guests and make it sort of a nice marketing sort of thing. So we got up at about 4 a.m, and it was freezing, and we raced over all the dry pans to get here. And as we arrived, we saw some giraffe coming toward this sort of section, and we just waited and waited and waited and got bored and got cold, and then all of a sudden, all 5 of them lined up. And the thing is, if you look at the giraffe on the far left, you can see it starting to walk away. It was another 2 steps, and that giraffe threw off this whole combination. It no longer was there. So thankfully, we were ready and waiting to go. So, I mean, I can go on about that for forever, but it's so important to wait and to be patient. And I know if I'm oversimplifying it or stating the obvious, but that leads me on to the next point, which is keeping it simple and just remembering the basics. And I like to call it get back in the box. And why I label it get back in the box is because if I say keep it simple, what is simple? So I think if people tell you to think out the box, it becomes too much thinking and it gets confusing. So like this lioness would suggest, perhaps, look at what's in front of you. What is in your box in front of you that you have to work with? Which almost goes back to my first point. What tools can you use to then tell this story to bring out those emotions that are happening around you? And so here's an example, okay, of what I like to say, or what I like to think of get back in the box. So here's the sighting, these Prado lions, and it's all too familiar. That's something that we deal with quite a lot in the reserves, in the modern reserves, where there's roads, there's fences, and there's poor lighting. Now, I really wanted to capture this lion. I thought he was just so beautiful, and I really, really, really wanted to capture him. But the brother, as you can see on the right, was sitting in the fence line, and there was only 2 of them, and he wasn't quite, fitting into the frame. And then the lioness walked off to the side. So there goes my third, my odd number. Then there's a road, which I don't really want because it's a man-made thing. And of course, the obvious fence, which is just a disaster. So what I suggested to my guest was, this male lion kept gazing toward us, and we picked up that you could see that little catch lights in his eye. So I thought, you know what, let's move the vehicle back. So like I mentioned the angle thing earlier about moving the vehicle back, which we did. We moved the vehicle slightly back and we took this photograph, and, it was a great photograph. And at the, when we got back to the lodge, I said to my guests, let's see how we can really let's make this pop. Let's make this just so fantastic. And so what I did was I went back to my style, my fine art style. For some people, for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. However, for me, and it's something I really enjoy. So let's keep it simple. Let's make it a very simple fine art edit. However, look at the impact. So I'm going to transition across again. So I'm going to push the button now, and you'll see it transition into the shot that we finally came up with. So there we go. Now, as a print, you put that up on your wall, just by cropping in, leveling it out, the catch light, using that bad light. So what I did was I overexposed, which blew out the background. So you see that. So you overexpose on purpose, which gets rid of the fence, and there's a certain, that's gone. Then the lioness on the left is gone, and you can use a few techniques around spot removal and stuff to get rid of it if you wanted to. But if you're a naturalist, perhaps you can just keep blowing it out until they do disappear. And of course, the brother's gone. So here's a very simple fine art edit that we literally just did a few tweaks, but the impact of it. Now, if you can imagine this as a print, which is also another very good point, by the way, if you can picture your photograph in print form, you'll take better photographs. It'll make you concentrate a lot more. So, this is a print above your bed would be an absolutely stunning print. And it was something that could have perhaps not worked very well, but it did indeed. Which brings me on to the next topic, which is my favorite. I absolutely love this. This is what I like to call the walks of life, just to try and give it a bit more of a fun name, but it's basically animal behavior. So, people often say, which photography books must I buy? And I often say animal behavior. So that's a bit broad, but why I love it so much is because if you can somewhat predict, and I mean, we all know that you can't predict in animals what he's going to do next, of course, because they're wild animals. But if you can somewhat predict their general movements, you can really, really, really help your photography. This lioness that you see popping up all the time on as I change slides, this particular lioness, we knew that she had just eaten. All right, she was full and it was getting really hot. So that's an obvious one. Okay, she's going to go and drink. So we saw her get up and walk towards a watering hole. But now, bear in mind, the watering hole was 2 kilometers away and she was walking through thick bush. So 2 kilometers worth of waiting. But we drove around to the watering hole and we thought she's going to come out of the bush at that area there. So let's park the vehicle down here on the other side of the watering hole to get that low angle. Remember, parking further away. And let's take the chance that she's going to come and drink at that spot because it's easy access to the water and it's going to be the best photographic position for us. Well, she must have overheard us because she came right there and drank right there. This photograph was not in a hide, like a lot of people think, but just using simple animal behavior, that's a more simple one. And the guides who are around you and the game rangers and guides that you might be with, they'll be able to read it a lot for you, but it'll be nice if you can read it yourself. We're going to move on to something called, we'll move on to something which is the phlegm grimace. So let me start that because that's a fun animal behavior that we'll talk, which also leads me to one of my favorite stories that I managed to capture and film in the bush as well. So it all pertains to the walks of life, right? So and in this case, the dancing black rhino. So it's a bit blurry for now. I'm sorry. This was on my very, very first camera. The light was bad, so I decided to film. I'm glad I did. I'm very, very glad I did. So what you see here is this front rhino. It's a black rhino, and this is a young male. He's picked up on the scent of the rhino at the back, which is a female, all right? And one thing that animals do, if your friends have ever sent you an email of a horse smiling or a dog smiling at you, don't be fooled, okay? It's quite gross. And I'm glad that humans perhaps have maybe moved away from this, but animals practice something called the phlegm grimace. And basically what that is there's an organ in their mouth and they will lick urine or smell the, let's say, the reproductive organs of the opposite sex, or they will, lick dung or eat dung or just even sniff in the air sometimes. And what they do is they lift their head up high and they bare their teeth and they suck a lot of air in and they get that scent rotating around their nose and mouth area. And much like us, we've all got our identity numbers. animals have all got their sort of scent markers. They've got their own ID numbers. So like these black rhinos will be able to tell exactly which black rhino is in the area just by smell. You know, and they can sense if there's a female in heat as well. And this is the situation or the scenario that we arrived on here. The female was in heavy estrus, okay, heavily in heat, and this young male had picked up on that. So now he wants to show off. You can see his horns aren't that big, so you can tell he's quite a young male. He's probably, you know, this is maybe even his first mating attempt. I'm not sure, but watch what he does to try and impress this female. But pay attention to a few things, okay? So firstly, pay attention to what he does to impress the female. That's brilliant. Then pay attention to the photographic opportunities. There's poor light, okay? So I filmed this, but if I had not filmed this, I would have focused on motion blur, okay? Because look how he runs, there'll be dust. And then the third thing is, you know, you'll see how he uses the phlegm and grimace. And these are the things you want to be waiting for as a photographer, okay? So enjoy the video, but also watch for those things as I push play. So off he goes. So there's potential motion blur shots all over here. And he decides to chase a wildebeest to show off. But that's not the only wildebeest victim of the day, because as you can see, there's a herd, and he's got a lot of energy. And he does a dance for her. Quite surprisingly, shows a bit of interest. I can only imagine what story the wildebeest told when they got home that evening. Right, so there's the phlegm and grimace. Wildebeest wants nothing of it, doesn't want to kiss this rhino. It looks like he wants to kiss, but in fact, it is what we call a phlegm and grimace. So this was a very fun sighting, okay, wonderful sighting, that's great. But we looked through our binoculars across the grass plains, and we saw this. Okay, so as you can see, the light was poor. So if the photograph comes out on your end quite badly, I do apologize. It wasn't my best equipment, and I just took the photograph for the story's sake. This was a big bull, a dominant bull. Now you can see the size of the horn has completely changed. But look what he's doing, another phlegm and grimace. Okay, so just before this frame, he had put his head down and he had picked up on this female's scent, and he was now tracking her. And as you can see, they open their mouth, and it makes a fantastic shot. I mean, just a really fun shot to see. But he was now looking for this female, and he was really looking for this female. So we just couldn't help ourselves. It was beyond taking photographs after this. So we decided to film. And after a couple of hours, he finally found the next scene. So I'm going to change to the next scene. I'm going to have to explain it a bit because it is a bit of a weird one. So this is when he found the other rhino. Okay. So the rhino on the right is the young male. He's trying to stake his claim. All right. However, the bull, the big bull, look at the size horn, look at the horn difference there, okay? One can only imagine that this is going to lead to an absolute disaster. So watch the behavior, okay? So we thought there's going to be a big rhino fight and it's going to be crazy, but look what he does. He'll go and sniff, because remember, rhino's eyesight isn't the greatest, so he'll want to rely heavily on his sense of smell. So he'll go and check its smell and estrus. He'll nod his head almost in disgust at that there's another male, a younger male, because he'll probably pick up the scent of both animals. And then see what happens. You know, you can tell that this bull has been around for a long time, and you can tell that he doesn't necessarily need violence to solve matters, although it might get uncomfortable for a few viewers. So there's the head nod, and this is how he dispatches of his competition. And with a simple little gesture to move on, he stakes his claim. All right, so that's just one example of animal behavior that can lead to incredible photographic opportunities and absolutely really, really fun sightings to watch. So I've got a story that I'd love to share, and it kind of sums up a few things that I spoke about, around all these techniques that we've spoken about. And I like to call it the John, because I feel like there is only one in the world, and he's the main man, the lion, and the monkey orange. So this is in my early guiding days, and John was the tracker that I worked with. He's a really well-versed tracker, very, very, very clued up man. And he taught me pretty much everything there is to know about the bush. The best thing about John was that he had an absolute wicked sense of humor, and he would never pass up an opportunity for a joke. So the one afternoon, this afternoon, we decided to go and look for a male lion, okay? Because the guest wants a male lion, which is not a problem. Let's go and track. So off we went, all right? And John also never passed up an opportunity to teach me. And I like to call him my bush father because, you know, he really looked after me in so many more ways than one. So here he's teaching about the tracks, how old are they, where they're going. And we tracked this male lion. We found fresh tracks, and we tracked him towards a dry riverbed, all right, that was leading up the sort of hill. And what we do is when the tracks disappear off the road, we'll grab our rifles, or I'll grab my rifle and John his machete or panga, and we'll track this lion on foot. And when we find him, we'll return back to the vehicle and then take the vehicle in off-road or 4x4 off to where that line is. Sounds simple enough. So off we go. And, you know, with John, he's so good at what he does that when you get close to a lion, when we get close to a buffalo or a rhino, he can read the tracks so well that when he bends down, he picks something up, sometimes a stick, sometimes a rock, and in this case, a monkey orange, which is a very hard fruit that you find growing off the trees up in Zululand. And what he does is if the animal sort of charges, you might throw it at the animal or throw it also to distract it a bit and gives a bit of time to make a plan. So we're tracking up this riverbed and he bends down and he picks up a monkey orange. So I know, okay, it's go time. It's go time. We are about to get either trampled or eaten by something. As we're going up the riverbed, there's a very big thicket in front of us, a very, very big thicket. Now, when John tracks, it's quick. But him and I have, you know, we worked so well together and for so long together that we don't really talk to each other. It's all just subtle gestures. So he puts his little left hand out with a little gesture to go around the left of the thicket to look for tracks because he wants to look on the right. So we both separate and we both get to either side of the thicket. And as we sort of get about as far apart from each other as we could possibly get, we hear this explosion from above the riverbed. This just complete and utter crazy roar. And this male lion comes barreling out of a bush ahead of us and running towards us. I could hear the pitter-patter of his feet going along the ground, and the roar, or the growl rather, that he had was like a brr. And as he was doing it, you could feel it in your chest, you know. And to this day, I don't know, and probably not is the answer. However, I felt that he stopped so close, he was so close that I could almost smell his breath. But at the last minute, as he's running towards John and I, he turns and he runs towards John. So I move around the back of the thicket, and the lion's roaring at John and growling at John, who's, you know, by the time I got back to John, the monkey orange is gone. So one can only sort of assume what happened there. But I tapped him on the shoulder, and then he moves behind me in the rifle, and we slowly move backward. And this lion's following us, roaring the whole way and growling, and he's really making a big show. And again, I could almost swear I could smell that breath. And the eyes were so piercing that I often say that he wasn't looking at me, he was looking into me, if that makes sense. You know, it was just such a deep stare. And he pushed us back and he pushed us back and he pushed us back to a point where the guests could now see us getting harassed by this lion, and a guest even shouting out, "Can I help you?" And the answer is most certainly no. But, you know, so eventually we get back onto the vehicle, the lion has enough, and he walks back up the riverbed, and off he goes, and we lose sight of him. So we hop onto the vehicle, I put my rifle away, I start the vehicle, and John comes and sits next to me in the vehicle. Now, John starts chuckling, he starts laughing and shaking his head. And he starts muttering and muttering and muttering. I said, "John, what's wrong? I mean, we've walked lions and buffalo and elephants many times before. We've had worse situations than this. You know, like, what's going on?" He's muttering. He's like, "Oh, I can't believe this." And eventually I'm like, "John, what's going on?" Like, we get to the lion. We finally find him lying under the tree. And we get there and he says, and I say, "John, seriously, what's bugging you?" He goes, "You know, Matt, that lion's quite racist." So, well, myself and my guest were just absolutely done. The fact that John believes that there might be a racist lion out there because it chose to go for him was just, and we just couldn't keep our laughter in, and it completely broke us on the vehicle, which is absolutely, it's one of my most memorable moments in the bush. That's just John's wicked sense of humor for you. But what has that got to do with everything today and the storytelling in wildlife photography? Well, when this lion was lying in that shade, it was a hot day and he was breathing to cool down, to try and catch his breath. And, he had this really menaced look on his face. So it kind of reminded me of when he was charging us. So I wanted to capture that. I got the photograph I was after, and this is what I came up with. All right, this is the final product. This was that exact male lion that charged us that day. And why I wanted to show this photograph, because I think it sort of culminates everything I tried to speak about, this story. You can see because he was running after us, his mane is now standing up, but when you zoom in, it looks like his mane is exploding into the frame. I don't know if you can see that, but it almost looks like it's exploding into the frame. You can see the catch light in his eye, which adds that depth into his eye. And not only that, but when he's looking at you, he's looking into you. You get that feeling that he's really, really, really sussing you out, and you almost can tell what you're thinking. I've used rule of thirds so that the eye is sitting in the sort of almost in the middle, and that his nose is in the middle. So it gives you that sense that the whole face sucks you in. And then of course the bared teeth. He was actually panting, but it kind of looks like he's almost grimacing in a way. And of course, something so important, I managed to capture the scars and things like that. But luckily he was up on a termite mound and I got underneath him to photograph him. So he's looking down on you. And by cropping the picture slightly up, down on you again. So you get that inferiority, that low angle inferiority. So, these types of experiences, yes, I mean, I don't suggest now as a photographer that you go out there and get charged by a lion. So please let's not make this but Matt said. But, take these experiences that you've had in life. It doesn't have to be a lion charge. It can be an experience that you've had, elsewhere that you can bring into the photograph. Change your mindset before you take the photograph. Don't just try and look for the perfect photograph. Look for a story. I think that's so important. You'll be so surprised how it'll change absolutely everything. Needless to say, myself and John survived that quite well, and still best of mates and still going strong. Also still very much a prankster, and never let your guard down around him. So that's good, old John. If you ever end up going to Pinda Mountain Lodge, by the way, I'm quite sure you'll come across him. Please tell him I say hi. So yeah, that sort of sums up everything that I wanted to really talk about today. I'm trying my absolute best not to go too in depth, and I'm trying not to talk about too many things because it's such a rabbit hole, photography. But I'm very happy to chat about it further after this and speak more about it. And just, I hope that I inspired you today to perhaps look at photography a little bit differently, because we can talk about shutter speeds, ISOs, those types of things any day of the week. But I think to be inspired to think different about a photograph is so much more better. And, I'm so happy to announce that we are back on the photographic safaris again. We're back on them. We've got some coming up from Pinda, Rhino River Lodge, and Mala Mala. And, if there's any that you might be interested in, please contact me, whether it's even just a question, even if you just want to perhaps find out something, or if you want to book a trip through us. We work through Explorations, which is a great company. So yeah, even if you don't, please don't miss out on the lockdown specials. There's a lot of lodges out there doing some phenomenal South African rates at the moment, and I think they need some support. So if you're inspired today to do some photography, please support these guys. It'll be absolutely magic. And then, yeah, like I say, just please contact me. Here's all my details if you want to jot them down. The top is my email address. Basically, even if you Google search Matt Yardley, I should pop up quite quickly. Otherwise, everything is just sort of Matt Yardley or Matt Yardley photography, and quite easy to find. So, that's if you have any questions of any kind, photography, even birds, whatever it might be, I am absolutely more than happy to field those questions. And just, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Ayanda and Graeme. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was very lovely. That was amazing. I see we got some questions from Graeme. I'm just going to read the questions and then you can answer, Matthew.
Sure.
He says, VW images seem to have more atmosphere. Is that generally so? Post-production seems to be quite critical. Is it a lengthy, complex process? how many images does one take before you get the shot?
Okay, so I think there's sort of three questions there, which is very good questions, because it's very, very pertinent to photography. So black and white images do have an atmosphere. I completely agree. And people often ask why, and I don't know, I think it's the contrast. But for me, what I often say is that I find sometimes color can be distracting. Once you take color away, what you're left with is kind of a raw motion for me. And, you know, the black and whites make it moody, and you can then fiddle. You can make them darker or brighter. You can make them, you know, you can make them feel a bit happier or sadder. So there's a lot you can work with in the motion sort of a sphere, if you want to, by making it black and white. By removing color and making that picture more simple, people are focusing on the subject a lot more. So if you take any picture and make it black and white, you immediately get a sense of an eerie feeling. Sometimes perhaps you'll feel a sudden change. And I think it's the contrast that it brings. The second question with the post-production, I think post-production is critical. If there are any naturalists listening to me, any photographer naturalists, they'll completely disagree, because a lot of my mates are naturalists, and what that means is they like to get the shot and almost don't touch the photo afterwards. And that is fantastic. If that's your style, then please, you know, like that, then you must go for it. I enjoy fine art photography, and so post-production for me becomes essential. All the photographs that you saw today, by the way, were done in Lightroom. They were not done in Photoshop at all. So I didn't manipulate a picture to a point where, you know, I was adding things in, or, you know, making it completely a fake picture. In Lightroom, there's something called spot removal. So there were certain things I could remove out of the picture that were a bit distracting, but just to set that clear. So post-production, it can be as lengthy as you want it to be. In post-production, if you want it to be a shorter process, there are things called presets, and Lightroom there are thousands of different presets you can get in Lightroom to create your mood. That will be very quick and easy, and the basics are very quick and easy. Lightroom is a phenomenal tool. If you ever want to use production software, I'd suggest that. And then was it how many images, before you get the shot? So it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string answer, I suppose, because you know, in that case of the lion looking up at the airplane, I mean, that was thousands. You know, no, it was a bit of exaggeration. I'd say it's probably close to 100. And then there was a shot that I did. It's called Wall of Elephants. Also a very, very popular picture of mine. I picked the camera up, I took one photograph, and I put the camera away. Now, it's so interesting that you say the shot, because there's something I found in my career. I kind of break my photographs down into categories A, B, and C, or 1, 2, and 3, if you like. The A being the best, B being nice, and then C being nah. You know, it's not the worst, but yeah. It is amazing for my fine art type of photography. It is amazing how many pictures I work with in the B and C category. It is absolutely amazing. And I think it's just because there's a certain element to it that I miss, I think, in the beginning. And then when I add other elements to it, it becomes something so special. So to answer your question, I think once you understand your style of photography, and once you have a clear image in your mind of what you want to get out of it, that will determine how many shots you take to get that picture.
Okay.
Is that it? Is that all three I got?
There's another question.
Sure, yeah.
There's a technique called raw photography. Do you use that?
So yeah, raw photography is you get JPEG and RAW that you can shoot on in photography. And basically what that means is, to put it in sort of simple terms, layman terms, RAW is a very big file. So if your camera can carry a 24 meg picture, if you shoot on RAW, you should be shooting a 24 meg pic every time you push that trigger down. Whereas if you shoot on JPEG, you can get a small JPEG, high JPEG, etc. That'll condense it down to 8 megs. So what it's doing is it's taking the pixels and just squashing them for you. A lot of sports journalists, or journalists for that matter, might use a combination of both RAW and JPEG, so that they've got the big file if they need it. But like, let's say for news journalists, so they come across a riot in the streets, and they take a picture of something happening. and they want to send it to the newspapers fast, they've got the raw image to keep so that they can deal with it later, but the news need it now. So they take the JPEG and send it because it's a smaller, more manageable file, compressed file. I would suggest, if you have got the storage and if you've got enough memory cards and you can afford, because it can get quite costly sometimes, shoot on RAW if your camera will allow it. But otherwise, you know, a high JPEG file, if you're starting out, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I started out, all my photos were high JPEG. Just be careful. If you do have the means to shoot in RAW and you don't, just be careful that you're losing out on a lot of information on your pictures later on.
Okay, no, thank you, Matthew. I think that was it on the questions, and thank you very much for your time. Simbiti really appreciates your talk. Those were very lovely pictures, and
Yeah.
I think more people will be in contact with you. It was very lovely. They all tell a story, so they were all stunning. I don't know if Graeme has something to say, but on my side, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah, Graeme, thank you.
No, I'd just like to echo Ayanda's comments. It was lovely. There's the detail in some of those pictures. I mean, it's quite breathtaking. And the only daunting thing, I think, is the amount of time that it takes to get that beauty in those pictures. That's why I was asking the question about black and white. But anyway, Matt, thank you very, very much. Sorry for the long delay in getting you to come on today. But thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, yeah, please feel free to shout if there's anything I can help with. And thanks to all of those who may have joined today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, cheers.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Good night. Thank you. Stay safe.